Святый вечер, уставайте, братья, святый вечер и добрый вечер, горы рябые, не бойте рано, святый вечер и добрый вечер, уставайте, братья, надевайте платья, святый вечер и добрый вечер.
Yeah. Get it going. We got a good one. We have this young lady. Got a good one today. This is a part 2 stream I did about a year ago. Why people hate Christians. It's a very hot topic this week, last week, past few weeks. It's an ongoing topic, so let's get into it. So this lady, she claims that she was born into a hate group. So she says Survivor Tells All. Her channel is pretty cool. Just discovered it actually. I don't know. I haven't watched any of her other videos, so we're gonna check this one out. See what she has to say.
My name is Jenny, and I spent my entire Hi guys, my name is Jenny, and I spent my entire life in Christian nationalism, white supremacy, anything that you can imagine about alt-right Mormon communities that are prepping and fighting against the evils of the world. I was a trad wife for 24 years, and I just left all of this behind. I left the Mormon Church in 2018, and I left MAGA just about 2 years ago. And today I want to dive into all of the many questions that I'm getting around white supremacy, what that looked like from the inside out, my rationalization and justification for it. And I do want to give a little warning at the beginning of this video that I think that some of the things I'm going to talk about are going to be really hard to hear. And I want you to know that they are just as hard for me to talk about as they will be for you to listen to. So let's just dive right in. I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take 2.
Most people are too lazy to do this, but it saves homeowners thousands.
Saving thousands.
Over who our neighbors are, and that is just for the sake of preserving, our culture.
And that culture, effectively, we're saying this is a white culture, a whites only place.
White American culture.
Over the last year and a half, high up in the Ozark Hills in the state of Arkansas, dozens of people have been working hard, leveling the land, building houses. They call it an intentional community based around shared ancestry, a long-winded way of saying something really quite simple.
I think we would generally be called far right, sure.
It's called Return to the Land, and they invited me in, a seemingly bucolic and sometimes surreal experience. But this is built on a radical modern premise, made possible because of a new political and technological moment, one with strong ties to the most active far-right groups in the US. Instead of taking to the streets, they are building their own, for generations to come.
It's important for me to do this for my ancestors, my friends, my family, my children, my children's children.
Now, I don't have a problem with this necessarily. Everyone's entitled to, separating themselves, isolating themselves. You see that a lot. You have FBAs, they don't want to interact with other races or even other blacks, whether it be Africans, Caribbeans. But the issue I have is when you look at these communities, for example, right? They want to be separate. They don't want to be around quote unquote black people. Now, this is one thing I brought up before on these streams when I've covered this this town, is that whenever I see these types of collectives, it's always broke people. Because rich whites, like wealthy whites, they don't feel the need to come up here and say that they want to separate, because they're in neighborhoods that have $700,000 houses. So they're already separated. So I just find it funny when these people, they say, "Oh, we want to be away from everyone else, from all these other races." They're just basically telling you they broke.
Its founder says he is building a fortress for the white race.
It's a racial association. I kind of want to ask you, after seeing this, do you think what we're doing is immoral?
I have a ton of people sending me this video this week and asking me what I think about it. And I love that this video exists because I want you to imagine now 200 years down the line that this all-white community has, built in isolation there in the middle of the Ozarks or the Appalachians, wherever they are in Arkansas. And now their descendants 200 years from now, what are they going to look like? That's me. The Mormons did that 200 years ago. They left civilization. They took their little white European, Scandinavian, British, English, German selves out to Salt Lake City, and they taught their whites only stuff for 200 years. And I am the result of that. My kids are 7th generation. I was 5th generation. And we are the result of the OG white supremacist cult in America, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And people have asked, would you have moved to a community like that 7 years ago? I did. That was my life. I picked the whitest country club neighborhood, and that's where I lived. All of my friends were white. All of my friends were Mormon. And then when I left the Mormon church,
There you go. She just said it right there. And I know this because I grew up in these types of neighborhoods. I grew up around wealthy white people, and there aren't too many. Even the black people that live in these neighborhoods, they're not the ones that, the bad ones, quote unquote, the ones that people are complaining about. So whenever I see, especially whether it be on Twitter or wherever, I see, white men specifically complaining about how there's all these blacks around and it's a violence and there's theft. I'm like, yo, you broke. You're just telling on yourself.
all of my friends were still white, and they were all Christian. I just started talking about white supremacy on my YouTube channel here a couple of weeks ago. And I think that most people are picturing those neo-Nazi groups. They're picturing the skinheads. They're picturing the Klan. They're picturing all of that stuff. But what they don't realize is that there are white supremacists here in America today, and a lot of them, so many of them, that are packaged in Jesus and packaged in church, and they wear little crosses and they look really sweet, and they're absolutely not.
That's facts, because I have dealt with that growing up. I said it several times. I went to private school early on. My preschool years, I went to private school in the first primary years. So I grew up around a lot of these people that she's talking about. Some of these people that were, Christian, and I could tell, as a child, you don't really pick up on these things. But looking back, I could tell you a lot of these people, they held some prejudices, and some of them were most certainly racist. I have some neighbors I grew up not too far from me, and these people, they had a black cat, and the black cat's name was Niger, Niger, and they would even laugh about it and say, "Oh, ho, ho," when we would have, and these were church folk, these were Christian, quote unquote Christian people, right? They would laugh about it and say, "Oh, like when they would bring the cat to the vet, or if they had a black family over from church, that they would change the name. They would say the cat's name is Nigel." So this is real.
I want to share with you what that white supremacy felt like from the inside out. Now, a lot of my videos are carefully scripted. I have tons of scriptures and cross references and all kinds of other videos and stuff. I have 15 minutes before I have to go get in the shower and get ready for work. I'm in my pajamas and I haven't even had a makeup or eaten breakfast. So I don't have time to script it. We're just going to plow through this. And I think that it's more important to share what I learned and what my personal experience is than to cross reference all of the scriptures and the doctrines and everything that everybody said. So first of all, that viewpoint of born and raised multi-generational, I was the product of a community that this was their ideology since the beginning. And I was the child of multi-generational family. So every one of my aunts and uncles and my cousins and my mom and my grandparents and everybody, this was their absolute reality too. Okay, so here's what I believed about race. You have to go way back to the past life, which Mormons call the pre-existence. If you just Google Mormon pre-existence, and you can read all about that. I believed that I was literally birthed by one of the heavenly mothers and Heavenly Father, Elohim God, and that we lived in a life before we gained earth bodies where we could make choices and we had our personalities and our passions. Like the person that I am today, that's who I was in this past life. And all of God's spirit children were being born into this past life until he had amassed, billions and billions of people. And at that point, God, who was white, the heavenly mothers who were white, they called together all of his spirit children in what's called the council in heaven. And in this council in heaven, God told us that he wanted us to become a God like himself. And in order to do so, we'd have to come to earth, gain physical bodies. And if we passed the test, that we could come back to him and be gods and goddesses just like him and his heavenly wives. So God presents this plan for us to become like him. And his two sons volunteered to play a really pivotal role of savior. God wanted us to have free choice, and to do so, he'd have to have a sacrifice in the form of one of his children giving up their lives and also being that exemplar for everybody. So Jesus came forward, and Lucifer, who would later become Satan, and they had opposing views. All of us spirit children chose sides. 2/3 of us went with Jesus, and 1/3 of God's children went with Satan. Well, they lost the war, so they were cast out. They never received bodies. They could never become gods. And they are now these satanic forces that rule over the world, led by Satan. But of those 2/3, there were part of them that were kind of apathetic, kind of fence sitters was a word that one of the Mormon prophets used to describe them. And another phrase that the Mormon prophets used to describe these people who, like, they got to stay in heaven, they got to come down to earth, and they hadn't quite followed Satan, but they weren't the best spirit children of God. The phrase that the Mormon prophets use for them is less valiant. They were less valiant in their past life. And so what happened to those people, according to
Have you ever heard an old song that you really want to sample?
Kind of pretty ironic though that she's basically describing a libertarian, which I find pretty funny. But this is I think important to something important to explain here is that this is, Christianity is very splintered. There are so many sects of Christianity. You have the Protestants, you have the Catholics. I don't know if Catholics are considered Christian. I have no idea. But you have the evangelicals, you have the Anglican. So there's so many sects of Christianity. She's referring to her experiences growing up as a Mormon. So this is the Mormon experience that she had growing up in the United States.
people, according to what my church taught me, was they were cursed to be born to African families. And here's why being born to African families was such a curse. Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, Cain kills Abel. Cain is cursed with black skin. He's then removed from the Garden of Eden, which was in America, in Jackson County, Missouri. Adam on Diamond is the biblical Adamic language word that I was taught as a child. And so Cain was cast down to Africa, given black skin. All of his descendants were those less valiant spirits. So not only were they physically cursed, but they just weren't the best spirits to begin with.
That's wild to me, and I find it very interesting that this is Missouri. She's mentioning Missouri, but that's wild. Can you imagine young children learning this? Can you imagine young children growing up with this type of ideology where every black person they see or every person they see with dark skin, it's ingrained in their mind. They've been taught since a young child, since an infant, that these people have dark skin because in a past life they were evil. That's wild. There's no overcoming that. There's no coming back from that.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking this is crazy, it absolutely is. And I don't know how very many adults who hear this convert to the Mormon church. I think it's really a tricky thing to sell these days. But again, that childhood indoctrination, I was born and raised into a community that taught this. And I've said in other videos that just as I was learning how to walk and talk and like zip up my own coat in the kindergarten coat closet. I was being taught, you lived in heaven, Heavenly Father, the war in heaven, they're cursed, they're sent down, Black people, they come from Africa, they were bad spirits, and then Cain was bad here on earth. So those are not good people, nor are the indigenous people of the United States.
And this, gives you some insight into, you see a lot of these Christian missionaries and they go to Africa. I'm talking about present day. I'm not even talking about past times during the, colonialism. Present times, you see these Christian sects, whether it be evangelicals, whether it be, well, Mormons, I guess, are a sect or a part of evangelicals. But you see all kinds of Christians go to Africa trying to save these people. So this is kind of like, it's a derivative of this mindset where these people they need to be saved. You need to bring the gospel to them because they inherently are evil. They've been cursed from a past life.
Because the Book of Mormon, there was a good brother, there were two bad brothers. The bad brothers were cursed with brown skin. That's why the Indians have brown skin, because these are cursed people. And it would have been as difficult for me to unlearn that concept as it would have been to forget how to zip my coat in the kindergarten closet. Every cell in my body had accepted it as truth because I was taught it in scriptures, and scriptures don't lie. That's the truth. That's the most true thing in the world. Our prophets, our charismatic leaders with their big bright smiles stood at the pulpits in our local congregations and sometimes speaking the whole world talking about these truths. My parents, my family, my home reinforced it. The artwork, books that we had.
That's what's so dangerous. You see, these people will bring this message with a smile. So you see them, oh, they're grinning, they're happy, but deep down, these people, some of them, I'm not saying all, but some of them, they're following a wicked doctrine. So when you hear people, it's like a cloak. You hear people talking about they're bringing the word of Christ, they're bringing Christian values, they're bringing, the word of God. These, to some people, are dog whistles, right? This is what they're trying to say. This is what they're bringing. These are the ideas. This is the ideology they're bringing to the world.
Music that was written just for children reinforced this. The whole community at large reinforced this truth. For me to think anything otherwise would have been like learning to walk sideways instead of forward. No, my knees bent. I'm supposed to go forward. I can't walk sideways. Black people are cursed. Native Americans are cursed. And this right here is why I think that it's more dangerous than joining like a neo-Nazi group, because I never had critical thinking to begin with. I didn't come from just a normal life. My whole life was this. There are two other really important ideologies that are kind of foundational to my white supremacy. One of them was the battle of good and evil that was constantly going on. And that battle of good and evil made me look at people who were suffering as people who God was punishing. So let me give you an example of this. I know I've shared in another video that I was born in 1974. So I grew up with the Ethiopian famines. And I remember seeing them on the news and going to my grandma and saying, can we send some money? Like somebody had said, you can send money or something to help with food, put a check in the mail, do this. And my grandma saying, oh no, God has cursed them. We can't interfere with that. I viewed everything as a battle of good and evil. If you were being punished, then God was doing that to you and it wasn't my place to interfere. And I would look around at all of the suffering in the world. So Africa and Mexico, some of the Middle Eastern countries and stuff that were less developed in the 70s and 80s. And to me, that was just further proof. Oh yeah, God is really giving those people their consequences for being evil people, for not being Mormon, for not being righteous, and for choosing evil and idolatrous ways.
So here's some clarity, right, on some world current events. So when you see people who are identifying as, people of God, God-fearing people, people that are, practicing Christianity, people that love the Bible, right? And they look at injustices around the world and they take no action. And in some cases, they take action to accelerate the injustices. In some cases, they take action to accelerate the negative events that are happening to these people, right? Whether it be, acts of war, whether it be turning a blind eye on war, whether it be justifying acts of war against certain people, certain communities, certain countries, right? And these people justify it because they say, hey, this is God's punishment on those people because they're not of our race. These people are of darker skin. So they're cursed. This is God's curse on them, right? They're getting bombed because they're cursed. They're having famines because they're cursed. They have a drought because they're cursed. You see? So this is how a lot of these people justify these things. So people will get confused. They look at these men and women of God, and they say, how is it possible that you're advocating for God and you see these things and you turn a blind eye? She's explaining it here, right? Very well.
And then look at me and look at my community. We're so happy. We're so blessed. We have so much money. Never once did I think that's privilege or we have gotten here by stomping on everybody else. To me, my community was being blessed and their community was being cursed.
This helps a lot with justifying it as well, right? If you see these people as cursed, not only do you not see yourself as doing something wrong, but you see it as a duty. This is what you're supposed to be doing, right?
Because they followed Satan and I followed Jesus. That battle of good and evil, it was almost like rooting for a sports team, and I had so much indifference to it. I'm rooting for Jesus, and Jesus is going to take really good care of me. They're all on Satan's side. Like, we already know who's going to win this Super Bowl. It's going to be Jesus. Another teaching that really shaped white supremacy and shaped me was that God reveals things to the righteous, that all light and truth comes from God, and that he will pour out his spirit, pour out revelations, pour out innovations and technology to those who are chosen. So I believed that the founding fathers had been inspired by Heavenly Father. I believe that Christopher Columbus had been led across the sea by Heavenly Father. Any discoveries were because those people were more righteous, because they were more chosen, and because God was revealing his eternal truths to them, whether it was the discovery of electricity or some vaccine. I believed that God revealed everything. It wasn't just man-made discovery. It was God revealing things. And here's
I mean, I would push back against this because I would say that just from things I've experienced in my life, I do know that nature in itself reveals things to us. I like to garden. I enjoy, I mess around with bonsai trees. I'm very into botany, right? And sometimes you just be chilling out at the beach and you'll see something, you'll look at the sun hits the water a certain way, and you can see things are revealed to you through nature, right? A lot of the innovations we have today, you look at the B2 bomber, it's in the shape of a falcon, right? The B2 bomber is inspired off of wildlife, off of real nature, right? Because nature is made perfect, right? Everything is in balance in the world. So when you look at a B2 bomber, you look at like a helicopter is based off of a dragonfly, right? These are things in nature that inspire innovation. So I wouldn't necessarily say that, these things come to our mind out of nowhere. I would think that there's some sort of intelligence outside of ourselves. But that's twisted and used to justify. There are certain people who say that, they're prophetic. They've been told by God that this is a way that we should act, and not only that we should act, but that we should enforce that on the general collective, right? That's where it gets spooky.
how that shaped white supremacy for me. I did not believe that brown-skinned people who were cursed were capable of innovation, discovery, of doing anything great. This is really hard for me to say, but it's information that I think is really important for people to hear. That was
You see that a lot today, right? When they tell you, oh, Africans didn't innovate anything, they never had any architecture, they didn't have written language, right? So pay attention. These are things that are repeated over and over and over and over again, right? And it's this narrative, it's painted, it's cloaked with Christianity. And these people are taught these things since they're a child.
just validated by watching the news and seeing that, like, white people like me, we were living in houses with electricity, and then over there in Ethiopia, it was a disaster. They didn't have any innovation. They had not had the technology that we had because they were cursed. And so God didn't reveal any of those truths to them.
And bear in mind, she's talking about the 80s, right? 80s and 90s, because that's when she grew up. Nowadays, they ain't showing any footage of Africa, because Africa, I'm telling you, Africa is about to pass the US. Next few decades, because Africa is not one country. Several countries, they're collaborating together. Now they're getting involved. They're working together with China. They're working together with all kinds of other countries in the East, right? And these people are producing. That's the main difference. You look at Congo. Congo, I believe, has about 80 or 90% of the world's cobalt. All these countries, all these Western countries trying to go green. They're trying to do electric cars. How are they going to make these batteries? These lithium batteries require that cobalt. So these are things that Africa is required for a lot of these innovations we have in the West. they need Africa for these things. They don't have cobalt in the United States. They don't have cobalt in Canada and Europe, right? And if they do, it's not sufficient for these gigafactories that they're making out. They're pumping out all these Teslas, right?
Funny story to go along with this very dark little topic here. I think I was in about middle school when we started learning about the Aztecs and the Mayans. And all of a sudden, I see these really advanced civilizations, and our teachers were showing pictures of people, in slideshows and textbooks and stuff that were brown skinned. And I really grappled with that. Like, that couldn't be the case. So I come to class one day and I raise my hand and I say, little known fact, but the Mayans and the Aztecs were actually white skinned. They weren't brown skinned, because in the Book of Mormon, everybody who came from Jerusalem was white until the good, righteous, holy brother and then the two bad brothers got in a rift, and God cursed these two with a skin of blackness. That's the exact phrasage from the Book of Mormon. This guy's
And this is the biggest joke, because a lot of these beliefs, I'm saying like these beliefs. I'm not saying if you believe in a higher creator, yo, power to you. That's not what I'm saying, because as I said, a lot of things in nature point to the fact that there is a higher mind. There is some sort of higher intellect, higher than humans, right? But a lot of these people, this is what they see, right? They see that Jesus was a white man. That's how it's presented to them, right? But they don't even take that minute to think. Like, you in the Middle East, they weren't surviving that hot sun with white skin over there. All these countries that are equatorial, right, or sub-equatorial, these hot climate countries. This is why black people are black to begin with, because the sun is extremely hot. This is why black people have a broad nose, because the warm air is entering into the nasal cavity directly. Whereas European people, they're from a cooler climate. They have a slender nose. Their nasal passage is more slender, and the air gets warmed in the nasal passage before it enters their lungs. This is people that have evolved in a colder climate. That's why they have lighter skin, because they have less sunlight, right? There's less sun throughout the year. They're covered up more months in the year than African people. So if they had dark skin, like for example, me living in a Western country, in a country that experiences winter, where I have to wear long sleeves 8 months of the year, I have severe vitamin D deficiencies. My doctor prescribes me about 1,200 milligrams of vitamin D per day. That's a gram, 1.2 grams of vitamin D per day. That's a substantial amount of vitamin D. But that's because my skin is made for high sun, high UV, right? So people have evolved based on the climate that they live in. So to say that Jesus was a white man just doesn't make biological sense. But this is why a lot of these communities, they require that you are uneducated, that you are ignorant. Because if you just hear, oh, Jesus is a white man, it sounds good, and you may, it's close to home, right? You can relate to it. But in reality, it doesn't make any sense.
white and delightsome. These guys are cursed with the skin of blackness, that they will be loathsome unto him and his people. And then towards the end of the Book of Mormon, there's this huge battle, and the descendants of the brown guys, they kill all the white guys. So I had been taught from birth that the peoples of the Americas had originally been white through disobedience to God's plan. They had been cursed with brown skin. That's why, again, the Native Americans were brown skinned. So the only way that middle school me could reconcile these beautiful pyramids and the scientific discoveries and all the mathematics and everything of these ancient South American civilizations was to conclude that, oh, that must have been the Nephites. That was the white Indians that did all of that. The brown people were running around in the jungle eating raw meat. That's what my scriptures told me. The Book of Mormon taught me that the brown skinned people ended up being cannibals, and then they were forcing cannibalism on other people. There's this whole section in there where they kidnap all the women and children. They do horrible things to them, and then they force them to eat their own husbands and fathers. That's what I believed of the Indians. And that was the only reality that I knew. I don't remember what my middle school teacher said, but he did not agree with me. And again, when you think of white supremacists, you picture the neo-Nazis, you picture skinheads, whatever. The checker at Trader Joe's would have never thought Jenny's a white supremacist. But I would have left Trader Joe's. I would have driven home to my $1 million mansion. Again, I didn't have any Black or Native American or Mexican friends because they're descended from Native Americans. But I did have housekeepers and landscapers and other servant type of staff that were brown skinned, and I was really nice to them. I was really kind to them, but I also felt like that's where they belonged. So when my crew of Mexican housekeepers was on their knees scrubbing my toilets in my $1 million house and my fancy gated community in Mesa, Arizona, with all the luxury vehicles parked in the garage, I very much felt like they were in their place. That was the place, not that I had put them in, but that's where God had put them. And that's where they would be until they accepted the Mormon gospel, came back to Jesus, and washed away their curse in
Wow. You hearing this?
the baptismal font. My church also taught me that once someone was baptized in the Mormon church, whether you're African or Mexican or Native American, that you would become white. And I think that if I was just doing like a 1-minute video on what white supremacy was from the inside out, it was that moment right there of I am the white person in the $1 million house with all the white kids and all the success and all this stuff. And you're scrubbing my toilets, and that's God's order. That is the working definition of white supremacy right there. I've had a few people ask me if I ever had any internal conflict over my white supremacist views. And yes, there's a couple I want to share with you. So during the Ethiopian famines, where the world came out, and I was at a slumber party or something, and so they had the record. And I remember looking at that record case with all of these people of different colors and nationalities, and then listening to this song, and the song connected me emotionally to the suffering of the people in Ethiopia like it was intended to do. And I'm such a music girl anyway, and it like made me cry, and it totally inspired me. And so that became a conflict for me. On the one hand, my grandma, Africa's a hot mess, and we need to stay out of Africa. They're being cursed because they're bad people. They were bad spirits. But then on the other hand, this beautiful song that really spoke to my heart. I eventually saved up my babysitting money, bought myself a copy of the record that I kept in between my mattresses, because seriously, if my mom had found it, she probably would have chucked it in the
Contraband. She had an Ethiopian record. She had to keep it between the mattress like some coke.
garbage. That love and compassion and true connection for the Ethiopians through music did cause a lot of internal conflict, and I did have to incorporate a lot of mental gymnastics. Another moment of huge internal conflict for me was a church shooting that happened in South Carolina in like 2015, 2016, while we were living in South Carolina. And my initial instinct was to go to our friends and neighbors who were all members of the KKK. And I do want to be really clear, because I've talked about our friends who are KKK. My husband and I were invited to join, and I was never Klan. I was never, ever KKK. But I did.
Oh, I like how she says my husband and I were invited, but I was never. Okay, hear you loud and clear.
Definitely sympathize with them. The Klan hated Mormons too. If they had been more Mormon friendly, I don't know, maybe we would have joined. But they also hated us, and they wanted us to convert to being
Okay, so she clarifies there. Her husband didn't join. All right, sorry. He caught us stray.
Baptist. So when that event happened, I went immediately to the store that was owned by my clan, some leadership of the clan, and I bought all the Dixie flags that I could. I flew them in my planters. I flew one. I had bumper stickers. We had Dixie flags everywhere to show our support of our culture. And this was the window of time when I
Damn. Yeah, she looked rough. That's how a lot of them be looking too. Damn.
took this little selfie of myself with the Dixie flag, and it's right next to my little cross necklace there. And that's what was going on over the next couple of weeks, just watching the news stories, because I'm not a psychopath. I started to see the faces of people who had been killed and really dig into the story behind everything. And it was clear that I was on the absolute wrong side. So I took down all the Dixie flags and took off my pin and my earrings and whatever else I had that I was using to identify myself as part of the resistance. Another time that I had a lot of internal conflict over my white supremacy was as a 20-something-year-old reading the book Roots. I read it while we were in Arkansas with not only Mormon family that was already racist, but then our Southern Mormon family who was like old school white supremacist, totally racist, and connecting to the story of chattel slavery for the first time ever in my life caused so much internal conflict. And I
Now you see, this is why a lot of these institutions, right? They're trying to erase this history. They're trying to rewrite history, whitewashing of history. They're trying to unring the bell because you got a lot of Black Americans that don't know a lot of these things, right? Or they've been told just the worst and they don't know their full history, right? But they're trying to erase that entirely. They want every Black person to be like an Officer Tatum. That's their dream. That's the real American dream. If every Black person was like Officer Tatum, the US would be Trump wouldn't have to do any tariffs. They would be so rich. The US would be so rich.
remember reading that book and just thinking, how could God want this to happen to anybody just because Cain in the Garden of Eden did this and whatever? Like, how could a God want anyone to go through this? Roots caused a lot of internal conflict for me. Then I fell in love with Oprah, and she was like such a guide to me, and she helped me understand my life and the world in so many different ways. But Oprah, one day, just a few years into her show, had a gay couple on, and I would boycott Oprah for the next like 5 years. I actually had like a little watchdog group of moms where we boycotted certain movies and music groups and things like that. And I even made like a little flyer on Canva. It was called Nopra, No Oprah, Nopra. And I had this feeling of, oh, I trusted Oprah, but no, she was evil. So, man, that battle of good and evil. I know I've mentioned in other videos that I did vote for Barack Obama privately. Nobody ever knew that I had done that. And I was a huge Obama fan. I had to pretend like I wasn't on the outside. He was so inspiring.
Damn, that's rough. Sorry to hear that.
He had me from the Democratic National Convention. I was this alt-right, Mormon, Christian nationalist, white supremacist, and I voted for Barack Obama. But I justified that because he was half white. So I think that's about my limit for explaining white supremacy this morning. So let me segue into my journey out and a couple of really key moments for me. I left the Mormon church in 2018 and all of that collapsed, but I went back right into Christianity and still holding on to the white supremacy, the Christian nationalism, just believing that the Mormon church had been incorrect. I spent 4.5 years in Christianity and still hardcore MAGA. But then I was making lots of new friends, Mexican friends, African American friends, all kinds of people that just weren't white.
That's the thing. A thing I notice a lot about these hardcore MAGA people. First of all, if you MAGA in 2025, I don't know what to tell you because you've seen a lot. I was down with Trump. 2016 Trump is not 2025 Trump. It's not the same Trump, right? I'm not saying he got cloned. It's the same person, but it's a different presidency completely, right? The climate has changed. He sees what he could get away with. He's pushing the envelope. They're leaning into a lot of stuff. And a lot of these people, they're not necessarily racist, but they appeal to racist people. So when you see things like part of the reason why there was so much outrage of this Sweeney ad, right, with the jeans, is because these are like subtle jabs, subtle dog whistles. Something like that doesn't necessarily bother me. I don't care. I think it's pretty weak for, all the support that it got and people puffing up their chest because these are weak people. This is how weak people behave, right? This is like Sun Tzu Art of War. When you're weak, you pretend to be strong. When you're strong, you pretend to be weak. This is the art of war, right? So these are people pretending to be strong. These are not strong people. That's why you see the climate it is today, that they're so outspoken about these things because they feel that they're pinned against the wall. And facts, they are, right? A lot of these women, you see this nice young lady here, a lot of these women feel the same. A lot of the youth, right? A lot of students, right? They're not rocking with that. They're not rocking with that old stuff, right? Look at the biggest music nowadays, hip hop, right? Kids love sports. They love the streamers, the new streamers. The biggest streamers are Black Americans, right? So people are not rocking with that old, you know, boiled chicken type ideology anymore, But going back to the jeans, like, because these companies see the climate, they will lean into these things because they know it will sell. So that's the problem I have with it is that they rather than staying away from it, they're leaning into it just for money. People do these wicked things for money, right? So back to Trump now. 2025 Trump is a different Trump. MAGA is off the rails. And I could tell you when Trump lost my support, when I decided that I was done with this dude, was a long time ago. It was probably, I think it was around 2020. It was before the Capitol stupidity, where that was a complete mess. But he was pardoning people. He started pardoning some crazy criminals. Trump, he likes to talk about how he's against crime and all that, right? Trump hates crime. All these guys, these people can barely read. A lot of his constituents, a lot of his following or his base, his MAGA base, right? These people are not smart people. So they don't look into a lot, they don't dig deep, right? So someone like Trump, he comes out and says he's against crime. This dude pardoned a guy that had 800 years. There's a financial criminal that had about 800 years. I think more than 800 years. That's how many counts that this guy was convicted on for fraud. This guy took money out of millions of Americans' pockets. sentenced to 800 years in prison. They put him under the jail practically. Trump pardoned that dude, right? So when I saw that, I'm like, yo, and he pardoned people like Kodak Black, whatever. He throws a bone here and there to people to, just to have a story blow up and kind of, people won't really look into what's going on behind the scenes. But I saw that because I follow things in depth. And when I saw that, I'm like, yo, this dude, I don't know. I'm not with it. And now to see what MAGA has become is just, these people are unhinged.
And starting to see the world in a very different perspective. And I know that a lot of people have asked me what it was that catapulted me out of white supremacy. Well, first of all, having deconstructed the Book of Mormon and working with cult deprogrammers and deconstruction experts and therapists and just reading books and employing critical thinking for the first time, I then deconstructed the Bible and realized that I no longer see evidence for it or a God. And letting go of that and the Garden of Eden and all of the mythology and a vengeful God who wants to curse people, that opened up this space for change. So it was my religious deconstruction that led me to begin to deconstruct racism and white supremacy. But it was kind of an accidental little funny thing that happened one day that led to just catapulting me completely out of it. I was just scrolling through Facebook and I came across a professor, and I don't even remember if she was Johns Hopkins or Duke University or where she was, but I found this professor and she was talking about genetics and some genetic research, and she was talking about the gene for blonde hair, blue eyes, and white skin and how recent that was. I don't even know where to find her now, but it was this whole lecture series on the Fertile Crescent, humans migrating out of the Fertile Crescent and spreading around the world, and then little things like red hair and blonde hair and white skin as we migrated further north. And I had this moment of shock realizing, oh, we didn't start as white children of a white God in the Garden of Eden. Humans actually started in this specific place and we were always brown. And what I am is a brand new mutation. In that moment, at age 48 years old, I realized that everything that I had been taught my whole entire life was a lie. And I had to learn to walk sideways, and here I am.
Yeah, I got it, ladies and gentlemen, because I don't lie. People hop on here and sometimes they debate back and forth or they're in the chat chirping. I do not lie, right? So I got it right here. Hold on. Bear with me here. I got it right here. I don't have the guy's name. Where's the guy's name? Well, it says his name here. Weiss, a former New York businessman, orchestrated a series of financial frauds that led to the collapse of the Natural Heritage Life Insurance. So this guy was selling life insurance. So let that sink in. This guy frauded people that thought they had life insurance, right? So how many people died and got no money? $0. While out on bail, Weiss fled the country and became a fugitive for more than a year in Austria. He was sentenced to 835 years in 2000. 835 years. 835 years. Pardon. Oh, there's his name. Shalom Weiss. 835 years. Let that sink in. Pardon. And that's just one person of a giant list, right? 30 years. You got some lifers here. Life in prison. 168 months. That's not too bad. So just imagine how much a lot of these people talk about black people. Ha! And this dude is pardoning people that had 800 years. I rest my case, folks. So yeah, y'all get in the comments. Y'all talk your shit. Y'all come try and get me out, get me fired. I don't care. Right? Get me fired for showing Wikipedia. That's why I say when people in 2025 are supporting MAGA, I'm like, yo, you're nuts. You're actually crazy. You have a brain amoeba. 2025. And I've always said it. Women that I've never been into MAGA women. Women, for some reason, there's something about us. If they're married, it's different. Married women who support MAGA, it's a bit different because at least it sounds strange. It's gonna sound bigoted, but the fact that they're married, there's some sort of redemption there because they're following their husband, and I believe that women should follow their husband. Sure, there are a lot of bad men out there. That's not my problem. If you choose the wrong guy and you're following him, that's your problem. But if you have an upstanding gentleman, an upstanding man, right, you should be following him. So these MAGA chicks that are married, it's not as bad. But the single ones, yo, these chicks act like they're rabid. They're nuts. They're nuts. Completely bonkers. So anyway, I'm glad I was able to get some insight there on this former MAGA. She left MAGA, born into a hate group. So this is Life Take Two. And I believe her name was Jenny. So shout out to Jenny. So here, I don't know too much. This is the only video I watched of her, so I don't know. She looks like she may be a feminist. You know, I don't agree with everybody on every issue that someone puts forth, right? You can't agree with every issue that someone has, right? So, or every opinion that one person has. If you agree with every opinion that someone has, is a problem. So you should have some points of contention. But hey, she spit facts in that video. She spit some facts. Anyway, I'm doing a short one tonight, so 52 minutes or so was a good one. We're gonna check out some more of this, perhaps more of her channel, maybe in the future. And yeah, I bid you guys a good night. Thank you for joining. Oh, and just in case anyone's watching later on, people of interest, of course, don't forget, I do think that Donald Trump is the best president ever. He's never told a lie. He's extremely handsome, best golfer. Every golf game was a hole in one, and he has an extremely large PP. So yeah, best president ever.